Welcome back to History on a Hog. I'm Cap'n Boz. Before I continue with the story, I wanted to clarify something about the militia units during the Red Stick Uprising. I stated that all of the early fighting had been done by the Tennessee militia. Well, that's not entirely true. They had plenty of help. Many other southern states also provided militia units to General Jackson's campaign against the Red Sticks. They hailed from Georgia, Kentucky, South Carolina, North Carolina, and from the Mississippi territories. They all fought with equal tenacity and courage, and had an equal affection for their moonshine. These units would stay with Andrew Jackson all the way to the Battle of New Orleans. It was really an all-Southern operation. So in Part 7, we learned that by 1814, the British military had begun to shift their war focus towards the South, with a new emphasis on attacking and taking the city of New Orleans, the gateway to the Mississippi River. And so to this end, the British needed a closer port facility to logistically and operationally support their attack on New Orleans and the American South. The obvious place was the city of Mobile, on Mobile Bay, about 60 miles closer to New Orleans. The British realized that it would be much simpler to attack New Orleans from Mobile. They figured it would be much easier on them, both logistically and operationally, to move men and their equipment along the Mississippi coastline, then up and around Lake Pontchartrain, and then head straight towards New Orleans. But they had several other options to consider as well. Option 2 would have the British assaulting New Orleans by sailing up the Mississippi River on troop barges. But in order to do this, they would have to proceed up the river 100 miles through a gauntlet of deadly harassing fire from American militia hiding in the bushes on the banks of the river. All the way from the mouth of the Mississippi on the Gulf of Mexico to New Orleans. They would undoubtedly take a lot of casualties in the process. This would be the least desirable option. Option 3 would have the British attacking New Orleans from the east, sailing their invasion fleet into Lake Borgne, while making a diversionary attack at the mouth of the Mississippi River. Lake Borgne was very shallow, so the British troop ships would have to anchor several miles offshore, and the troops would have to be landed using longboats. Once landed, these British troops would then be required to march, or slog would be a better term to describe it, their way through the famous Louisiana bayous, where in some cases they would be hip-deep in the alligator-infested swamp water and would be extremely vulnerable to American harassing fire. So in the end, the British came to the obvious conclusion that the overland option, starting from Mobile, was the best option. But now there was something else to consider. Andrew Jackson's swift and decisive victory over the Red Sticks had thrown a huge monkey wrench into the British plan. They had counted on the Red Sticks, creating a distraction and diverting the attention of the American military in the South. The British had expected to easily seize Mobile with the Americans distracted. Now they couldn't count on that and would have to rethink their plans, causing a significant time delay. Without realizing it, Jackson had bought himself a lot of time that he would use to bolster Mobile's defense. But despite the setback, the British knew that seizing Mobile was still the key to their success for their overall southern invasion plan. So in preparation, the British had begun shifting their forces from the north to the south, specifically towards Pensacola in Spanish Florida. They had already begun a troop buildup there with the intentions of launching an attack on Mobile, and then from there attack other places in the south, including New Orleans. But This was not a surprise to General Andrew Jackson. From his spy network, he had learned that the British were making preparations to launch an attack in the South, and he figured that Mobile would be their likely first target. It only made sense. So in response, Jackson devised a clever defensive plan to disrupt the British. The primary goal of Jackson's defensive plan would be to deny the British the use of all three major southern ports that could support an attack in the South. And those ports were Pensacola, Mobile, and New Orleans. So Jackson's plan would be focused on these three ports, and he would implement his overall plan in three phases. First, he would formally establish his 7th Military District headquarters in Mobile and get busy with strengthening the fortifications around the city and the port. And as part of the defensive preparations for Mobile, he saw the need to push out his defenses out to the mouth of Mobile Bay and rebuild an old military fort that had once been located at Mobile Point. With the placement of large cannons, he could control the maritime entrance into Mobile Bay and consequently deny the British the capability of attacking Mobile using their ships. He would make them attack Mobile by land. Second, Jackson would attack and seize the port of Pensacola and expel both British and Spanish troops that were defending the port. With Pensacola in American hands, Jackson would deny the British the continued use of their only port in the South. He would force them to use ports located in faraway Jamaica to support their invasion plans. Jackson also believed that his Pensacola attack would show American military strength and resolve in the South, and give not only the British, but the Spanish something to think about if they wanted to take any future aggressive action against the United States in the South. In any case, he would leave the political consequences of his invasion of Spanish Florida for President Madison to deal with. And in the third phase of his plan, Jackson would immediately send U.S. Army engineers to New Orleans to organize and begin construction of the city's defensive fortifications and prepare the citizens of New Orleans for the inevitable British invasion that was surely to come.
But first, it was on to Mobile. In August of 1814, Major General Jackson took command of U.S. forces here in Mobile and established his headquarters. And there was no time to waste. Anticipating a British attack, he immediately began the business of fortifying the fort. For him, the stakes were clear. If he didn't hold Mobile, the British would have a clear path to attack New Orleans by land. It was a direct shot to New Orleans from here.
Immediately after his arrival in Mobile, General Jackson sent Colonel William Lawrence and 160 regular Army troops, along with a dozen heavy cannons, south along the eastern shore of Mobile Bay and around to Mobile Point. There were no established roads there at this time, so it was a difficult 75-mile arduous trek through the forests and marshes of the eastern shore. After reaching Mobile Point, the Americans reoccupied the military fort that had been established there a year ago, after General Wilkinson had seized Mobile from the Spanish. They formally named the fort Fort Bowyer in honor of Colonel John Bowyer, one of Wilkinson's officers who had rebuilt the once Revolutionary War fort in June of 1813.
Upon their arrival at Fort Bowyer, Colonel Lawrence and his men went right to work, repairing the fort and getting the cannons set up in their redoubts, and then zeroed in. Knowing that Fort Bowyer was Mobile's first line of defense, General Jackson focused much of his attention to ensuring that the fort was operational and ready to repulse a British attack that was sure to come. They didn't have to wait long. On the evening of September 10th of 1814, a small force of 72 British Royal Marines and 100 native warriors landed 9 miles east of where I'm standing, at Fort Bowyer. Their mission? To make an assault at the rear of the fort and distract the Americans, while 4 British warships, including the British frigate HMS Hermes, would attack from the sea. The Marines would then capture the fort. With the fort in British hands, Mobile Bay would be wide open for British Royal Navy to attack.
And this is what the British plan to assault and seize Fort Bowyer would look like. They would depart from Spanish Pensacola in a fleet of at least 4 frigates and several troop barges, and then land on a sandy white beach 9 miles east of Fort Bowyer. Their landing would be unopposed. There were no American troops here. Simultaneously, HMS Hermes and 3 other frigates would commence bombarding the fort from seaward, using their ship's cannons. Here's another view using a present-day aerial photo looking west towards Mobile Point. Pensacola is to our back, and Fort Bowyer is in front of you. And that's part of Mobile Bay at the top right. But the rest of the story will have to wait for part 9. When you come back, see how the battle at Fort Bowyer unfolds. Would it be an American defeat by overwhelming British forces? Or would the American troops prevail and win an amazing victory? And how would the outcome of this battle affect the coming attack on Spanish Pensacola by General Jackson? Stay tuned for the next exciting episode of Muskets, Moonshine, and Red Sticks.